Well, just about 3 weeks away from the NFL draft, and we are breaking down position groups. Today, it's all about the cornerbacks, the top two according to CBS Sports.com. Cincy, Sauce Gardner, and then this guy, LSU's Derrick Stingley Jr. Now, we have not seen him since September 18th, most recently dealing with a Lisfranc break injury while he had an incredible 2019. He's only played 10 games in the past 2 seasons. There are the full rankings for the cornerback position. You see Ahmad Gardner, Sauce Gardner there, a little saucy from Cincy, sitting at the number 1 spot, followed by Derrick Stingley Jr. Let's welcome in our quarterbacks, Kanell and Brady Quinn, breaking down the draft cornerback prospects. Danny, I'm going to start with you. Maybe we'll call you Bryant McFadden for right now. What are the keys to finding the next great cornerback?
Well, I think it's like any other position. You know, there's always guys that pop when they run their 40 times and when they're out there running drills and you can see the sheer athleticism. And then there's guys that you want to see pop on film. But I think ultimately, you want people who can cover, right? I mean, it sounds very simple, but you want guys who can play man-to-man at the next level, who can run with NFL receivers, who aren't going to be a liability if you go man-to-man. I mean, there's a lot of guys that can play zone when you get help over the top with a safety, but you want people who can body up and get in press man and can run with the best receivers in the world. And I think there's the last aspect is the IQ. Like, you want somebody who has route recognition, who can pick up all your schemes, who knows the intricacies of playing in the game. So it's a total package of what you're looking for. But I would say those are some of the priorities I would be looking for as far as a cornerback if I was evaluating the talent.
So right now, what a lot of teams are looking at, the first thing is their stature, their length. You know, you typically like those cornerbacks who are 6 foot plus. That's the trend now in the NFL because wide receivers are getting taller. They're getting bigger. You've got to have bigger guys to be able to cover them. When we say length, we're talking about the arm length. You want a guy who can be able to reach across and jam that wide receiver at the line of scrimmage and not let him go. As Danny just talked about, you're going to play a lot of man-to-man or what you call a match zone, where really on the outside, it plays out like man-to-man. You're going to be on an island, so you better be able to get your hands on that opposing wide receiver. Length helps. Clearly speed. We see it in the 40 time and all of that. You've got to have cornerbacks who can get out and run, and recovery speed goes right along with that because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when they get beat and if they're going to be willing to recover and get back into phase at the hip of that wide receiver. That's the next step. Now, you can call football IQ instincts is really what you're talking about, is the ability to understand break points on routes, understand what the offense is trying to accomplish based on the formation, based on the split of that wide receiver. A lot of that plays into the instincts of that cornerback. And if you can, you'd like to have ball skills. You'd like to have a guy who's got some sticky fingers who, once he gets his hands on the football, he's not letting it go. You don't want to advertise out there to everyone in the world that, hey, you're at cornerback because you couldn't play wide receiver because you can't catch the football. And the last thing is confidence. You got to have confidence if you're a cornerback in the NFL. It's a lonely, lonely job. You don't get a lot of safety help, especially if you're a great cornerback. So for these young guys we just threw up there that are going in the first round or have the potential to go in the first round, you got to have a lot of swag, a lot of confidence.
You talk about speed. Derrick Stingley Jr. at his pro day, unofficial 4.37 40. So we're all hoping that we can see the Derrick Stingley Jr. of 2019. He looked great at his pro day. Compare him to Sauce Gardner because we have seen him consistently.
It's tough to compare because you're looking at the contrast to 2 players where one who's playing his best football the past couple of seasons in Sauce Gardner, but both tall, lanky. They're the prototypical size that you're looking for. You kind of can't go wrong. The difference between the two is, you just mentioned it, Derrick Stingley, 2019 was his best football. Only played 10 games the past couple of seasons. Sauce Gardner has been phenomenal the past 2 years. Now, you might say that, look, Sauce Gardner's playing at a lower level in a group of 5 team, but they've gone up against some pretty tough opponents. So I don't know that I hold that against them. At the end of the day, again, I don't know that you can go wrong. DK, if I had to pick one right now, even though Derrick Stingley made everything look so easy at his pro day today, I think I'd lead towards Sauce Gardner. That's more recency biased because I've just seen him more on tape the past couple of seasons.
Same here. 3 years of film, and you've seen somebody who's durable. And we've seen a lot of guys. Now, it works both ways. Sometimes guys are banged up. Sometimes they protect themselves in college, waiting for that big payday. And then when they get to the NFL, all of a sudden, they're a picture of health. And they can go out there when they're making a paycheck and stay healthy, and they become great pros. I think Derrick Stingley will be a solid pro. I think he's got the upside is clearly there. but I would take Sauce Gardner as well. And you mentioned the length. There's a couple, it's 2 inches of difference in length just straight off from the height advantage of 6'3", Sauce Gardner, which is a rarity. You don't see a lot of guys like that are that tall, that have the length, the arm length to get in guys that are physical at the same time, that aren't just too skinny and can't make plays. This is a guy who's a ball hawk who everybody was terrified of throwing against this past season, really established himself from 3 years of work that you've seen on tape. So I would say I would lean towards Sauce Gardner, although I don't think you're really taking a risk on Derrick Stingley of, oh, this is going to be a bust. I do worry about the injury history and what could be there. I think he'll be fine, but I want to go with the player I've seen more tape of.
Look, Derrick Stingley's dealing with a Liz Frank injury. I had a Liz Frank injury. I didn't have to run as much as a cornerback would have to. I promise you, it's not fun to deal with. It will plague him throughout the course of his career. It's not that big of a concern. He can come back and play with it and be a Pro Bowl caliber player, but it is something to take into consideration right now.
And Dennis Dodd asked him, or somebody who was at his pro day asked him, when were you 100%? He said 2 days ago. That was it. Let's look at 2 more here, and Andrew Booth versus Trent McDuffie here. And I'm kind of going to throw a wrench into this. So right now, Ryan Wilson has McDuffie going to the Eagles at 15, Booth to the Patriots at 21. Then you have Pete Prisco, who says McDuffie's teammate Kyler Gordon may be the better NFL corner out of those guys.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how I think both Kyler Gordon as well as Trent McDuffie are viewed. In comparison between Andrew Booth and McDuffie, it's a really slim margin. They're both really good players. Very well both could go in the first round. I lean more towards Andrew Booth. He's a little bit bigger. I think he has more of a propensity to play on the outside. Usually the smaller statured cornerbacks end up playing in the slot, and not that that's not something to be valued. There's a lot of value in that, especially as more teams go in 3 wide receiver sets and spread out the field. You better have someone who can cover the slot. But I think Andrew Booth, based on the scheme he played in Clemson throughout the course of his career and what he put on tape, is just as good as what we've seen from McDuffie, if not a little slightly better as a prospect. So I think it's a tough pick if you're a team picking between the two, but I would lean towards Booth.
I'd go with Booth too. My favoritism for the length. He is a couple inches taller. I also think, and we talked about this when we talked about McDuffie in some of our mock draft specials, Washington only played a handful of games 2 years ago. This past season, there was a bunch of turmoil going on with the staff. They weren't very good. And you haven't seen McDuffie against the kind of elite competition that you see in, I'll just say the South, because it's not the Southeastern Conference. Clemson clearly plays with the ACC, but they did play against Georgia. They played against South Carolina. They have played against, teams like Notre Dame. So we've seen him do it against better, talented players. But I think it's similar to Sauce Gardner. And when we look at him and Derrick Stingley, I think both of these guys are going to be fine pros. But if I was going to take one over the other, I would lean toward Andrew Booth Jr., his body of work, the length a little bit longer, as far as who I would take first in a draft.
Danny, what about a day 2, 3 guy? Anybody there with big upside you like?
Yeah, so all we talked about is length, right? All we talked about is length. I got a guy, and the reason he's falling is because he's only 5'8". Now, he's small. Seen Darrell Green was one of the best defensive backs ever to play in the game, is not that tall, but he could fly. Marcus Jones can fly, but he also can contribute in the punt and kick game. He is a versatile player that you could play in the slot, that you could match him up against, and he's just a competitor. That's what I love about him. Playing at Houston, he's been a guy who's seen a lot of action, in all phases of the game, and I think you'll find incredible value at him. Again, this is why he's not a first-round selection, is because of his size. He's too small for the game, and that'll be a knock against him. But give me a guy like that with a chip on his shoulder all day long, who I think could carve out a nice career for himself in the NFL, if not as a pure defensive back, but as a kick returner. As we've seen guys have great careers contributing in that portion of the game.
I think the hard part with that is, the kicking game is almost being eliminated at this point in time, right? You get a little more kicks at the college level because the kickers aren't necessarily kicking out of the end zone, not as many fair catches. At the NFL level, it's a little bit different. Mine is Tariq Woolen out of UTSA. You talk about length. This guy is 6'4", 205 pounds, and he is blazing fast. He ran a 4.2 640 at the combine. And now, that being said, he's raw. He's very new to the position. He used to be a wide receiver. They converted him over to a cornerback the past couple of seasons. But you got to love what you see on tape. He's got all the makings of the ability to being one of those next great cornerbacks at the NFL level. It's just a matter of him getting more of the reps, the experience. And so really the upside, an all-pro cornerback. The downside, he's a core special teams player that with that speed, that size, and ability, he could play 10 years in the league, even if he doesn't really rotate in on defense much, just being on special teams. So I love this player. I love this potential pick for whatever team takes him because of his versatility, his overall athleticism, and really the upside. We talk about it all the time when we come around this time of year, the upside with a lot of these prospects. Tariq Woolen is one of those players who's got plenty of upside.
Brady Quinn, Danny Kanell, thank you guys so much going through the cornerbacks that we're going to be looking at in this year's draft. Hard to believe it is just around the corner. Taking a look at Ryan Wilson's latest mock draft here, 10 through 15. You see 3 of them there. Sauce Gardner at 10 to the Jets, followed up by Derrick Stingley Jr. to the Vikings, and Trent McDuffie right now going to the Eagles at 15. Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.